Hello and welcome to episode 34 of the Community Trail Running Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Lee. Thank you for joining me. So many podcasts out there, and I so appreciate you spending a little bit of your time with me. Today we have the awesome filmmaker and creator Jeff Pelletier on the podcast. That makes for 7 straight weeks of content. I can't wait to share it. A little bit of housekeeping first. Speaking of filmmaking and creating, Tuesday, April 18th, the Trail Running Film Festival is coming to the Rio Theater in Vancouver. Tickets are going to go on sale very soon, and I will post about that the second they're available. I'm so excited to be part of this and bringing it to you here in Vancouver. And before we get to the interview, real quick, Galiano Trail Society, we're still hiring that position. It's in the podcast notes. Check it out. And I'm also working on bringing a race to the island with the society. We're doing it together. We're doing it to share the amazing trails of Galiano, and it looks like that's coming in late October, so stay tuned for more details on that. Finally, please continue to like, rate, share, and subscribe the podcast. It really helps share awesome interviews like this one with Jeff. Today's guest is Jeff Pelletier. Jeff is a trail runner from North Vancouver, and he also creates a lot of really great trail running content. His YouTube channel is incredibly popular, and he continues to run and document incredible adventures around the globe. Jeff, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me today, Adam.
I really appreciate it. I'm excited to get into it a little bit. And the first question's always the easiest. Just tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to enjoy trail running and why create the great videos.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on. I'm born and raised in Vancouver, Canada. I was always a pretty outdoorsy guy. I grew up camping a lot and sailing and hiking, but I wasn't super athletic. I wouldn't consider myself an athlete by any means. But then in my late 20s, I think like a lot of people kind of started running to sort of stay fit, and pretty quickly decided I wanted to run a marathon sort of as a bucket list item. And I did that. I did a few years of marathon training, and eventually discovered trail running, and then the rest is history. So I started running really when I was 27, but I didn't start trail running until I was about 30, and I'm now 41. So I've been trail running for just over 10 years, about 11 years.
And you dove in very hard, like very hard.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I like to say anything worth doing is worth overdoing, and running, I approach the same way. I'm a filmmaker by trade, or at least a video producer by trade. I run a video production agency. And so I also kind of early on started documenting my training and my races and adventures. Although I didn't really sort of do that with quite as much effort until I'd say about 5 years ago, kind of halfway through my trail running career, when I realized that maybe I had some stories to tell, and some, as I was continuing to learn and develop in my running career, that I can maybe teach people a few things as well who are just getting started. So kind of since about 2018, I've been documenting my races and my training and adventures as well for YouTube.
It's nice to have the background then, because it obviously shines through in the quality of the content that you're able to create.
Yeah, I had less of a learning curve, I guess, for when it comes to the technology side of it, at least, and I had a lot of the equipment. Although it's funny because as professionals, I see this kind of with some of my friends as well, who are professional photographers and videographers who start running, and there's this tendency to want to use all the big cameras, the expensive gear, and we have to sometimes kind of strip it back and simplify it, and sort of unlearn some of the habits we've developed, because it's a little bit different when you're running around with a camera, and the storytelling's a little bit different as well. So it's been almost trying to unlearn some things and sort of learn what works better for YouTube versus doing, say, higher production value client work, for example.
Yeah, of course. I guess it's all different for sure. I'm also wondering too, like the video life is a lot of long hours. How did you work all that running in?
Well, I mean, the work that I do, I don't work in the film industry. It's in the sort of corporate communications side of things. So It tends to have more of a 9 to 5 thing. And then my business, I've been running for so many years now that it's become a little bit less hands-on for me. So I have increasingly more time to both put in the training and the racing and the travel, and then also to do the post-production work that comes along with telling my own stories. But really, that was the shift for me. It's sort of as I started having a bit more time, I wanted to move away from, again, doing corporate work and telling other people's stories to kind of telling my own and having my own adventures and my own fun, which is, much more creative freedom is involved doing it that way, which was something that I was lacking with my client work. So that's the part I'm enjoying the most right now, is just being able to kind of experiment and tell the stories I want to tell the way I want to tell them.
This probably is a good little follow up to learning and unlearning some of that. As you've shot your running and told those stories, is there terrain or a kind of run that makes itself easier to tell a good story? And then on the flip side, is there something that's more difficult to tell a good story?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, just really simply, the longer the race, the easier it is to tell a story with video, because, and that's really just because it's, when you're trying to run fast, and by fast I mean, even a 50-kilometer race, it's really difficult to be filming and messing around with gear, and because you're worried about losing precious minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in, say, a 200-mile race where you're out there for 4 days, minutes don't matter as much. You're more concerned with hours. And so it's okay to maybe stop and film something, or to mess around with camera batteries here and there. So yeah, definitely the longer the race, the less pressure I feel is in terms of the clock. And in fact, I would almost say sometimes having a camera during a 100-miler can help you to slow down and pace yourself more. You're not as focused on pace. You're kind of thinking about telling a story, and that might actually help you in the long run. But yeah, basically, the shorter the race, the harder it is to document, for sure.
Some built-in strategy there. Do you
Yeah.
prefer to not be in a race then and shoot something like a little bit more relaxed, or?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when it comes to storytelling, it's a lot easier when you're in a more relaxed environment. Especially that I can set up shots, I can do multiple takes, kind of set up the camera and run back and forth, which I would never do in a race. I would never, I want the. I mean, mainly because I don't want to give up the time.
Of
I still want
course.
to be somewhat competitive, but also because I want the film to feel authentic. And if you can tell that I stopped and set up the camera, you'd be like, well, are you racing or not? Right. Whereas, if I'm just doing a fast packing adventure or something, then I think it's a little bit less distracting when I use those kind of techniques.
Yeah, I wonder then, because you've covered someone else chasing like an FKT, is there more pressure when it's someone else then?
Yeah, I mean, sure, a little bit. I filmed Gary Robbins doing his Big Chill, which was sort of, well, it was a backyard 100-miler that he was doing as sort of a, I mean, I guess it's an FKT in a sense that it's the only known time. It was a route that
Mhm.
he pieced together, and on the day he was trying to get it done fast and quickly and efficiently, and yeah, it did. There were times where, if I fell back to get a shot, I'd have to kind of rush ahead, and I was really hoping I wasn't holding him back. As it turned out, he didn't have the best day. His stomach was quite upset, so it turned out that he wasn't pushing as hard as he maybe would have been on a better day, which actually worked out better for me because I was able to keep up. But yeah, I mean, that's a consideration. You don't want to affect, this kind of goes back to how I film my own races. You don't want the filming to affect the story. It's almost like when you're a reporter, you shouldn't become the story. And in the same way, I don't want the filming to change the nature of the story,
Mhm.
of the adventure. I wouldn't want to do something, say, I wouldn't do normally just because I'm filming it. Say, taking a risk I wouldn't normally take, or um, or again, going, having a different race result and having it be really obvious that, like, you know, I if I only hadn't been filming, it would
Right.
have turned out differently. So yeah, so the camera, at the end of the day, it does sometimes get in the way a little bit, but I try not to let that happen. So yeah, so I think that's always something when you're filming somebody else, there has to be that discussion of like, if I can't keep up, I guess you better drop me, because you say completing that FKT or whatever your goal is, the race, is more important than having it filmed in most cases. So,
And then that
but
becomes
having
the
said
story.
that, like, yeah, exactly. Then that becomes the story. But a lot of those FKT videos and things you see, a lot of those are recreations for that reason. That's sort of a little known secret with a lot of those films that you see on YouTube.
That's fair. It's hard to capture that sort of thing and stay in the moment and not affect it. So
That's just it. Exactly.
I think you've probably told me some lessons already, but you've racked up so many views and accomplished quite a bit in your years of creating. Is there a lesson that stands out?
Well, I mean, I guess if I could kind of go back to my past self, or for any budding new filmmakers, I would just say to focus on the story. The story is the most important thing. Don't get hung up on gear, equipment, all that kind of stuff. It's production value, drone footage, all that kind of stuff is great, but only in as far as it helps to tell the story.
Hmm.
So if it helps to convey an emotion, if it helps to um, uh, sort of show the grandeur of an environment, because maybe that is part of the story. I think that's all important. But at the end of the day, it's about storytelling. I think that's the number one thing.
That's fantastic. Stick to what you're looking at.
Yeah, yeah.
um, Things have changed quite a bit in trail running since you've started too. What do you think about the current state of the industry?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's funny. I'm by no means an old school trail runner, but it does feel like things have evolved a lot just in the 10 or so years that I've been a trail runner. Mainly the sport's grown, which is great. The sport. I remember reading a few years back a report by, I think it was the American Trail Running Association, that claimed that trail running was the largest growing sport in the world, according to participation numbers. And I think the pandemic actually helped to accelerate that. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people probably moved away from road running to trail running. And I think a lot of people moved away from other sports and wanted to get out and hike and run and be in the mountains. So yeah, so I think we've seen it really grow. One sort of tangible way I've seen a change is, this is something a bunch of people comment on quite often, is it used to be, say 5 years ago, you'd go out on the local trails here in Vancouver, and if you saw a runner approaching, you'd pretty much think like, well, I probably know that person. Let me see who that is. And it was sort of like by default, like, let's see who this person is because I probably know them. And now
Right.
it's the opposite. Now it's almost like, you know what? There's so many new faces out there. Chances are I've never met this person, which is a very different thing, right? So yeah, so it's definitely grown. I think it's exciting. I think the other sort of huge benefit is that, on the one hand, some races are getting harder and harder to get into, as if they weren't hard
Mm-hmm.
enough. Like, say, Hard Rock. Some of these ones with lotteries. A lot of races are also becoming lotteries that weren't lotteries before. But we're seeing more and more races as well. More and more race directors starting new race series. So I think in the end, it's nothing but it's a net positive, I would say.
And do you have any plans for the coming year, video or running wise?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, 2022 was a big year for me, a big season for me
Mm-hmm.
and for Audrey. We did a lot of travel and racing, and 2023 is going to be big as well. I haven't quite solidified my racing calendar. I've got a bunch of ideas and things I'm trying to fit together like a big puzzle piece. But I do know that one of my first big objectives will be I'm going to go to England, to Northern England, to the Lake District, for pretty much the month of June. And I'm going to recce and then eventually run the Bob Graham Round there.
Wow.
And Bob Graham Round is a 106 kilometer, I believe, route, a loop that summits 38 different peaks there. They're all of a certain stature. They call them Monroes, which is, they're not huge mountains, but they're definitely sizable peaks. And you have to do that within 24 hours for
Oh,
your
wow.
Bob Graham Round attempt to be recognized. Yeah. So it's going to be really cool because I've never been to, I mean, I've been to London, but I've never been to the mountains there. I've never done any fell running in the UK, which is, my understanding is it's like trail running, but a little bit different. You're sort of off the trails. Um, I'm going to do a couple short fell races while I'm there, and really just try to soak it all in. That sort of see how fell running in the UK compares to trail running in North America and in the Alps. So I'm really excited about that. And of course, I'll be making a documentary about my experience there, about the background of the Bob Graham Round, kind of the entire thing.
Amazing. Well, let people know where they can follow your adventures along.
For sure. So best place is on YouTube. If you just search for me, Jeff Pelletier, and also on Instagram, J Pelletier on Instagram, and I post a lot of content there as well.
Huge thank you to Jeff Pelletier. Huge thank you to all of you listening. Shout out to race volunteers everywhere. And until next time, I'm Adam Lee, and this is Community Trail Running.